All
right, so greeting and welcome everyone. We will begin with the questions. We have 3 questions from English and 2 questions from the Chinese speaking audience. So the first one in the English is about killing. So for example, killing a mosquito for the sake of protecting our own health. Is that permissible? Is that okay? So, first of all, from the Buddhist perspective, killing is a naturally negative action. So, the action of killing cannot be seen in a positive way. All right. So, if it is an action that is naturally negative, then we say that even if it, at the cost of my own life, I have to avoid engaging this negativity. And therefore, killing a mosquito for the sake of protecting my own health is not permissible. However, there are other means of protecting our health and avoiding being bitten by mosquitoes that do not involve killing the mosquitoes. So this is the choice we should make. The Buddha has made it very clear that killing is a very heavy action. Of course, we have the exception of the bodhisattvas. When there is a situation where there is great need and there will be great benefit in protecting other sentient beings, the bodhisattvas on high levels, they have permission to break these rules of these non-virtuous actions. However, we are not bodhisattvas and we are not have permission to go around killing other living beings. So these exceptions do not apply to us. So that was the first question. The second question had to do with this scenario. Suppose you had the intention to perform a particular action. So let's look at killing here, for example. However, you never actually acted on this thought, on this intention. So you don't have the actual deed and you don't have the application. So at the end, you don't kill anyone. So the question was, what sort of result will come out of this? So we say that for a karmic path to be complete, we must have all the elements in place. So we must have the motivation, we must have the application, and we must have the conclusion at the end. If all 3 components are actually in place, then what we establish is what is called the grade action of killing, right? So, but if not all the components are present, then it can either become middle or it can become small. So in the case where, as we say, we have all components in place, it becomes the big action of killing, and the maturational result of that is to be reborn in the hells. If you are missing the motivation, right? And unintentionally, let's say by accident, however, you do engage in the action of killing and someone is killed, you have the middle killing, and the result of that is to be reborn as a hungry ghost. If you have the motivation, but you do not engage in the actual physical act of killing, and at the end, no one is killed, which is the scenario you bring up here, then you have the small act of killing, and the result of that is to be reborn as an animal. So, okay, we come to the third question, and the third question has to do with this practice where sometimes we are reciting various mantras or we're doing prayers at the ears of someone who is very sick, like at the deathbed, or an animal that is about to die, and so forth. And if we look at it from their perspective of completing or not completing the karmic path, because the last part, which is the conclusion, in order to be completed, it means that the other person must understand the meaning of the words. So here, if we're dealing with someone who is about to die, whether it is human or an animal, then it is quite possible that that being does not comprehend the mantras we are reciting. So the question is there benefit in that or not? So Geshe is saying that although the karmic path is not actually completed, nevertheless, we say that there is benefit. And this is why definitely in there is the tradition, the Buddhist, the Tibetan tradition, that we do recite mantras to animals or to people at the very end stage of their life and so forth. And the reason for that is because those mantras and those prayers are very powerful. So merely by coming in contact with the ear consciousness, they posit imprints that are very strong. And we know, we have many stories and anecdotes of how useful those imprints can be. So, for example, when Master Vasubandhu was reciting the 5 great treatises, close to the place where he was doing his recitation, there was a pigeon that was nesting, and that pigeon could hear this recitation day in and day out. Later, when that pigeon died, it came back, it was reborn as a human, and it was a great scholar on the 5 great treatises because it had heard it before. Okay. All right, so then we have another 2 questions. So let's look at question number 4 for tonight. If I lie with a good motivation, does the fault of lying actually occur or not? Okay, so here the question is, if I lie with a good motivation, so who is having what level of motivation? If you're talking about a bodhisattva who is motivated by bodhicitta and needs to act in a particular way for the greater benefit of many sentient beings, then for such a bodhisattva motivated by bodhicitta, there will not be a fault. However, we say that we are not bodhisattvas, so we're talking about ordinary people like us who are motivated, let's say here, by a good motivation. Now, when we talk about good motivation, we have motivation at the time of the cause, and motivation at the time of carrying out the activity. So although the motivation at the time of the cause might be a noble one, the motivation at the time of carrying out the activity is a deceitful motivation, because you have to say a believable lie, right? So Geshe says, due to that, I think that there is the fault. So to give you an example, if you, let's say, there is someone who is hunting an animal to kill it, right? And you have a monk, and the monk actually happens to see which direction the animal has gone. And there comes the hunter a few minutes later and asks the monk, have you seen the animal? Now, the monk understands here that what is the intention of this man? The man is wanting to kill the animal. So if he tells the truth and says, yes, I saw the animal and the animal went down that way, it means the animal will have to be killed. If he says, I didn't see the animal, he will be saying a lie. So again, that's not correct. So in this occasion, the advice is that he has to give a completely irrelevant answer, something about the weather or something completely irrelevant. Okay, so from this story, Geshe says, I would say that, yes, for us, there is fault if you lie. Yes. Okay, so we come now to the last question. The last question is asking, what is the difference between karma and karmic path? Because we were using this karmic path quite a lot. Okay, so if we look at the group of 10 non-virtuous actions, first of all, if it is karma, it has to do with physical and verbal actions. Okay, now, so let's say that you have the intention, you have the motivation to kill, you have the desire to kill someone. At that point where you have the intention or the motivation to kill, you have the karma of killing. However, you don't have the karmic path. You don't have the karmic path because actually you have not engaged the activity of taking the life. You are planning, you are thinking about killing. So you have killing karma, but not the karmic path of killing. Okay. Then, if you have the motivation to kill and you combine this with the application means you actually carry out the activity and somebody is killed. In this case, you have both the karma and the karmic path. Okay, so this is for physical and verbal activities. Now let's come to the three non-virtuous actions of the mind. So we have covetousness, we have malice, and we have wrong views. So in this case, we say, for example, in terms of covetousness, the first instance is that you generate the wish to have the wealth of others. And then that intensifies. And then finally, you come to the point where you 100% decide, I'm going to have their wealth. So once you have all those three levels of desire to obtain the wealth of others, we have the complete karmic path. However, it is not karma. It is karmic path, but not karma. Why? Because here we are dealing with intention, we are dealing with affliction. And if we look at the description or the motivation, we say that the root of our results, of our experiences, is karma and afflictions. And these two things are separate. So here, with the three mental states, we are actually talking about afflictions. We are talking about the intention, the mental factor of intention to do something. So it is karmic path, but not karma. So to summarize and clarify this point, if we look at the 7 non-virtuous actions that are the 3 of body and 4 of speech, they are karmic path and also they are karma. But if we're looking at the 3 negative actions of the mind, they are karmic path, but they're not karma. They're karmic path because they are the motivation, the intention. They are not karma because they are afflictions. Okay, so we're going back into our own text, just to go back into the major outlines. In the major outlines, we're looking at how we meditate on the actual session. And we say meditation on the actual session here includes 4 topics. The first one is considering death and impermanence. The second one is the suffering of unfortunate migrations. The third one is going for refuge. And the fourth one is generating the faith of belief in the law of cause and effect. Now, as you notice in the easy path here, the section on the law of cause and effect is very brief. And this is why Geshe suggested that actually we supplement this from other more extensive Lamrim texts. And this is how Geshe has been teaching this subject. So when we supplement from other Lamrim texts, we see that the law of cause and effect is presented under 3 major outlines. The first one is the general presentation of karma. The second one is specific or detailed presentation of karma. And the third one are further classifications. So for the first one, the general presentation of karma, we're looking at the 4 main principles of karma, that karma is definite, that karma multiplies, that you cannot meet with karma you have not created, and that once created karma will not go to waste. We have done this. Then we come into the specific presentation, and the specific presentation first of all, identifies that there is black and white karma, and it has 3 divisions or 3 headings. The first one is the actual presentation of the karmic path, which is what Geshe did in the last session, where we looked at all the 10 non-virtuous actions. This is followed by the relative heaviness of these actions, and then finally we have the results of these actions. Okay, so actually when we're looking at the second subject, which is today, it will be the distinction in terms of the heaviness of those actions. And this again is followed by further classifications of karma or actions. So when we're looking at the distinctions of heaviness of those 10 non-virtuous actions. If we look at Lamrim Chenmo, we will see that there are actually different classifications according to different texts. So if we look at Master Asanga's text on the Vinaya, we find that there are 5 ways of classifying or differentiating lightness and heaviness. If we look at other texts, we find 6 classifications. If we look at, there are different texts. Some give a list of 5, some give a list of 6. Taking all this into account, we have a list of 16. And finally, in Lamrim Chenmo, these are presented as a list of 6. Okay, so if we look at this list of 6 things that will make a difference in terms of the heaviness or the lightness of negativity, the first one can be heavy because it is always done. The second one is heavy due to created by a strong affliction. So this is referring to the affliction at the time of motivation. The third one is heavy due to performance. So, for example, if you are killing, you're killing in a very sadistic manner. The third one is heavy because of not applying any antidote. The fifth one is heavy due to the basis. So, for example, you're doing something inappropriate to your parents, to your guru, to an arhat, pratyeka Buddha, and so forth. And the last one is heavy by nature. So these are the 6. So let's look at the first factor. We can say that karma can be heavy because it is something which is always done. Always done here shows that we repeat this action again and again, so there is continuity in the engagement. An example of that is idle gossip, covetousness, and malice. So we tend to do those things again and again very easily. We engage in those things and without necessitating any particularly strong motivation and without applying any antidote. It's just something that out of habit we keep doing every day. And by doing this at the end, we amass a very big amount of negativity. So it becomes very heavy because it is continuously done. Okay, so we looked at examples of non-virtuous actions, but exactly the same applies to virtuous actions. So if you're doing something continuously every day, if you have the habit of doing it, such as, for example, doing prostrations or doing your prayers, your recitations, every day that adds up. So it builds up a big mass of virtue. Okay, so as we say, it's not that the basis needs to be very special. It's not that you're doing it with a special motivation. It's not the case of a special antidote and so forth. It's just something that you continuously do, repeatedly do. And because you do it repeatedly and continuously, it has an accumulative effect. So we have explained the first one of the 6, which an action becomes heavy because it is always done. The second one, the action becomes heavy due to strong affliction. So here you do it because you're motivated by very strong affliction. So it is not just a little bit of annoyance. Here we say you do it due to very strong anger, of very strong attachment, of very strong ignorance and confusion. So even though you might not be something that you do every day all the time, or maybe you are not doing it towards a special basis and so forth, because you do it with a very strong motivation, it becomes heavy. So just as it works with non-virtuous actions, it also works with virtuous actions. So when you create roots of virtue that are free from attachment, they are free from hatred, they are free from confusion, then the action becomes very strong. So we gave the example before of prostrating. And if you do it with a very pure and a very strong motivation, and also if you have that joy and enthusiasm when you apply yourself to the actual deed, then what you create is very strong virtue. Okay. We come to the third one, which say the action becomes heavy due to the way that it is performed. We're giving the example here of killing, and we say that means that at the time where you're killing in a very sadistic manner. So instead of just killing the animal in a straightforward way, you inflict unnecessary pain and torture. So, for example, you might skin the animal while it is alive, or burn it whilst it is alive, torture it before you kill it. There are other examples in this case, heavy due to performance. So, for example, you might be killing while your victim is very weak, it is suffering, or it is impoverished. You know, someone who is already in a pitiful condition, and you want to kill them, and or you know, take delight in killing, and not only doing it yourself, but you're causing others to kill, and praising this type of killing and so forth. If we look at the virtuous side of this, if you engage in a virtuous activity, whether it is an act of generosity, you're making offerings, you're prostrating, if you do it really diligently, like really apply yourself to that activity, then it becomes heavy, it becomes a substantial action. The fourth one, the fourth factor is a case where an action becomes very heavy due to the absence of an antidote. So let's say you engage in a non-virtuous activity and you have no antidote, nothing to counteract it. So antidote here could be the four opponent powers. So you don't employ any of these. Or the other could be to, for example, abide on precepts. You take precepts for a day. And practice generosity, or practice some ethics, even if it is for a day. These have the power to counteract a bit the activity. But if you don't have those, if you don't have any antidote, it becomes heavy. If we look at the virtue side of this, due to the lack of the antidote, it means that any virtue you will do will become very powerful if you do not rely on any negativity. If you don't engage any negativity, your virtue will be very strong. The fifth factor that can make an action very heavy is the basis. So the basis here refers, for example, to your parents or your guru, or those who are still training. Training here means on the path of seeing or the path of meditation, or you do something in relation to bodhisattva or hearer or solitary realizer. So in all those cases, any action you do is the serious action. So we mentioned that any action we do, whether it is virtuous or non-virtuous, becomes very heavy in relation to our parents. And the reason for that is because our parents have greatly benefited us. So the parents are described as the field of benefit. Anything we do in relation to the field of benefit is very heavy. As for the remaining things, individuals that we mentioned in the list, for example, your guru, or those who are training, those who are bodhisattvas, those who are hearers and solitary realizers, they are very important field. They're called the field of qualities. So again, everything we do in terms of the field of qualities becomes very heavy, good or bad. So we identify two fields, the field of benefit and the field of qualities. So if we look at killing, for example, compared to killing an animal and compared to killing a human is considered a heavier karma, because the physical body, the physical basis of the human is better, has more advantages compared to the physical body of an animal. Then again, within animals, if we compare killing of an insect with killing of an animal that has a large body, such as, for example, a bull or a cow or an ox and so forth, killing an animal with a larger body is a bigger negativity, heavier negativity, because the bigger the body, the more suffering is experienced. Okay, finally, we look at the sixth factor, which is actions becoming heavy due to nature. So for that, we're looking within the group of 10 non-virtuous actions, and we say if we look at them, amongst them, some of them naturally are lighter and some of them are naturally heavier. So if we start with the list of the three of the body, the first one, killing, is heavier. The next one, which is stealing, is lighter. The next one, that is sexual misconduct, is even lighter than that. Okay, after the three of the body, we have the four of the speech, starting with lying. So lying is considered to be lighter than sexual misconduct. After lying, we have divisive speech. Divisive speech is lighter than lying. After divisive speech, we have harsh words. That is lighter than the previous one. And then the last one is idle gossip, which is considered to be the lightest in this sequence. Now, if we look at the remaining three, which are the three non-virtuous actions of mind, the order is reversed, meaning the one that we enumerate first, which is covetousness, is the lightest. The next one, which is malice, is middleweight. And the very last one, which is wrong views, is actually the heaviest. So we see that in those of body and speech, it starts with the heaviest and goes to the lightest. But with the three of the mind, becomes with the lightest and goes towards the heaviest. So if we look at the group of the 7 non-virtuous actions of body and speech, the heaviest is killing. But if we look among all 10 non-virtuous actions, the heaviest is wrong views. So let's look at the worst possible scenario. Let's look at someone who is always killing, someone who is never establishing any virtue, and that person decides to kill, let's say, their father or their mother or a trainee. They apply themselves diligently to the action. They do it sadistically and enjoy it whilst they're doing it. Then we have a case of a very heavy action that is heavy in 6 ways. Okay, we looked at the heaviest. Let's look at the lightest. So let's say you have an individual that is always engaging in virtue, but once they sleep, right? And they do only once. They do a non-virtuous action, and let's say they do the lightest, which is idle gossip. And in terms of their motivation, they don't have any strong motivation, right? So everything is light. It will be the lightest case of non-virtuous action. So as you see, we gave here 6 distinctions in terms of heaviness. If you can have all 6 of them present, or you could have 5 of them present, or 4, or 3, or 2, or just 1. And the less of those factors you have, the lighter the activity, the non-virtuous activity becomes. So it is very important to be quite aware of our activities, the way that we operate in terms of our body, speech, and mind, and always apply alertness and introspection. Always examine, what am I doing? How am I doing it? How am I operating here? And we must make every effort to avoid even the smallest negativity. But even if negativity happens, we shouldn't just let it reach the point of maturation. Instead, we should try to remove it as much as possible with purification and confession. Okay, the next outline after this is a criteria for powerful actions. And in that, we have 4 aspects. We can have strength or power in terms of the recipient. We can have strength in terms of the support. We can have strength in terms of the object. And finally, we can have strength in terms of the attitude. Okay, so we said for the first one, we're talking about strength in terms of the recipient or the field. And the recipient or the field of your action can be something like the three jewels, your own guru, or someone who is similar to your guru in terms of qualities, or your father, your mother, and so forth. Now, we mentioned here that especially the three jewels, and from amongst them, we mentioned also, the Buddha. The Buddha is a very vast field. So even if you do something very small in relation to the Buddha, the results and the consequences will be massive. So we have mentioned here from the mindfulness of the excellent teaching, where it say, even if you were to offer food and all necessities to every sentient being that exists for a month, you would accumulate a lot of merit. But if you were to offer a tiny amount of food to the Buddha, the merit or the virtue would be much more than what you created otherwise. Also, we have other mention with in other sutras that make analogies like this, where it says, if one were to venerate for one's entire life a house full of fully ordained sangha, and if one were to offer everything that they need and all the necessities and all the requirements for one's entire life, as compared to making a small offering in a relic that exists within a stupa, the merit in the second case would be even greater. So here we see even the relic of the Buddha, even venerating the relic of a Buddha is even stronger than serving and venerating other members of the Sangha. Also in Pema Karpo, it says, even just casting a flower in the direction of the Buddha, thinking about supreme enlightenment, will bring one to the state of final nirvana. And these sources actually indicate what incredible merit we generate towards this special field, which is the three jewels, and in particular the Buddhas. Okay, we come to the second one, which is strength in terms of support. And here we're making the distinction between someone who is wise and someone who is foolish, because they say that the negativity of the wise is light. The negativity of the foolish is always heavy. So the wise is someone who can understand the shortcomings of those faults, of those negativities, and therefore it is someone who will try to restrain from engaging in them in the future, will try to apply the antidote and purify and do something about it. In contrast, someone who is not knowledgeable, someone who is a fool, will not know about those things, will not know about antidotes, will not realize the seriousness of the situation, and therefore their negativity will end up being very heavy. So here, when we say that an activity might be strong in terms of support, we explain it in two ways. One way is to be knowledgeable, right? And we explain that if you're skilled and knowledgeable, you will have regret, you will know, you will recognize the faults of those negative actions, you will try to restrain yourself in the future, you will try to apply the antidotes. And all of those things will make the negativity lighter. Okay, another way of explaining support here, support can indicate having vows or not. So they say, if someone engages all paths of 10 non-virtuous actions, the result from that will be to be reborn in the hell, and that person there will experience quite a lot of suffering. That suffering is small compared to the suffering that someone who is ordained, the suffering that will be created by someone who is ordained, and in one day they break one of the vows or misbehave for one day, right? So because they have vows, the suffering they will have to endure is heavier than someone who's done all the 10 non-virtuous actions. So here, when we're discussing strength in terms of the support, we say that having vows or not having vows makes a very big difference. So once you have vows, anything that you do, whether it is virtue or non-virtue, becomes very powerful. So if you're someone who has all three sets of vows, vows of individual liberation, bodhisattva vows, tantric vows, then any virtue that you do will be very strong virtue. But also, it means that you have to be very careful to avoid all negativities. So if you have assumed vows, especially if you have all three sets of vows, you have to be very careful not to do anything that goes against the prohibitions of the vows.